Well, there is a card that was revealed that pretty much puts a timer on the game, ending in 3 turns. It's nutty. I'm going to take a look at it. I don't know, maybe people are overreacting, but let's take a look at the most recent cards that have gotten revealed for the new set. First, we're going to start with Plague Spreader, a 4/4 undead. It's a neutral. Death Rattle, transform a random minion in your opponent's hand into a Plague Spreader. This one is really interesting. Again, more disruption. We're seeing kind of a lot of disruption. Is this actually going to be good enough to be played? I don't know. There is still that death rattle aspect, so you would have to play this, kill it off, and then, hope that you hit the minion in your opponent's hand that you want. But I can definitely see it being used as more disruption if people want it. Next, we have the Vrykul Necrolite. This is a 2-mana 2/2 undead. Battle Cry, give a friendly minion Death Rattle, summon a 2/2 zombie with Rush. This seems pretty cool, actually. This it's only giving 1 minion the Death Rattle, but it still is another Death Rattle. It has Rush, which is cool. It's got this undead tag. The zombie will have undead, and I can definitely see something like this being used specifically in Death Knights, or maybe even some like aggressive style decks, but Death Knights really can take advantage of this. Next, we have Nerubian Vizier, a 3-mana 2/4 undead. Battlecry, discover a spell. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, it costs 2 less. This one is really kind of interesting. You're probably playing it for the discover. Discovering a spell seems pretty good. You're going to be discovering a class spell for whatever class you're playing. So those discover effects are always a little bit more impactful than what we've seen with just getting a random spell. And, if you're running some undead stuff, you might get a bonus here. I don't think that you actually necessarily will care every time about having the discount. So honestly, I think this one is not bad. Again, probably playing this in like Death Knights or something where you're actually kind of leaning a little bit on the undead. But I think some classes that want to discover spells, we've seen in the past, even something like Big Spell Mage that runs minions, very much like this, in order to kind of fill in and then get to that later game and have more spells. So this one's pretty interesting, and I think it might see some use. Next up, we have Tenacious Sanlian, a 5-mana 4/6 undead with lifesteal. Whenever this attacks, it deals 2 damage to the enemy hero. I love this card. Love, 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 love this. The lifesteal aspect is nutty. And whenever this attacks, I mean, yes, it doesn't have Rush on it initially, but if you're able to give your minions Rush or, do something to that effect, then you're going to get this benefit. If you can even pair it with some sort of Wind Fury effect, you can attack multiple times. But the thing that this does is it forces your opponent to answer this because they don't want to leave this on the board. But since it has lifesteal just base, then if they attack into it, you still get some lifesteal effect at the same time. So this one is really interesting. I'm not exactly sure where people will fit it in. My first instinct right now is Blood Death Knight to go in with kind of the other lifesteal type of stuff. But this might see fit, this might see play and fit in somewhere else as well. Next, we have Drakariembalmer, a 3-mana 3/4 undead with a battle cry, give a friendly undead reborn. This one again, it seems okay. My instinct is that this probably gets put into some sort of Death Knights deck. You're going with the undead stuff. Maybe if there's some other thing that's not Death Knight that's playing undead, you might want to fit it in there. But it's nothing fancy, but it seems okay. And actually the reborn on some of those minions, just having another body seems pretty impactful. And the next one is Incorporal Corporal. It is a 2-mana 5/5 undead that says after this minion attacks, destroy it. So this one, low mana cost, really good stats, but after it attacks, you destroy it. Now, typically, I think we don't see cards like this see play, so the instinct is that this is just kind of bad, but there are some ways that you can play this and maybe silence it. There was similar cards that, Silence Priest tried to be a thing for a short time. Maybe you still can put this in some sort of aggressive deck. It does have that undead tag, so trying to bring it back or doing something like that, sure, maybe. But overall, I probably don't see this being play. Next up, we have Arms Dealer, a 1 mana 1/2 undead. After you summon an undead, give it +1 attack. This, again, this kind of feels like a card that you might want to play in a more aggressive deck where you're going to have this lower curve. This is probably not living long enough to actually give you a lot of benefits. So if you play this on turn 1, it's probably not sticking around till turn 3 or 4 even. So you're going to have to use a lot of things or, play a card with this that summons multiple undead for you to get more of a benefit. We've seen cards like that as well, but they tend to end up being in kind of niche style decks. I would say, decks like the kind of Dude Paladin that we've seen use effects like that. And in a similar kind of thinking, sometimes we've seen things like this in like Beast or Aggro Druids. But with this being undead, I'm not really sure. I think there are probably better undead things, and I don't know if there's going to be an aggressive style undead deck, so I don't think this one's all that great. Then next we have Shatter Skin Gargoyle, a 6 mana 4/6 undead with Taunt and a Death Rattle, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. Honestly, this one seems pretty good for mid-range or control style decks that really just, they want to stall the game a little bit. They want to have a taunt out on the board. It is undead, so it has a little bit of synergy to work, with it. And this is kind of what you want against more aggressive decks. A taunt that they have to attack into and then is going to deal some damage, likely killing off one of their additional minions as well. We have seen some similar kind of taunt cards. Undying Disciple is one that comes to mind, the 3/7, that when it dies, it deals its attack to the minions. Same thing, and I definitely think that this will see some play. Next up, we have Brittle Skin Zombie, a 3 mana 4/3 undead with a Death Rattle. If it's your opponent's turn, deal 3 damage to them. So this is saying, and I think I saw they might be reworking the wording. Not sure on that, but to clarify, this is deal 3 damage to the opponent, their hero. So if this gets killed off on your opponent's turn, they will take the 3 damage. It doesn't do any damage to minions or anything on board. It's just the enemy hero. Okay, it might be used, but honestly, I think we've seen similar things that don't really tend to end up doing a lot. Maybe the undead tag will help it fit in somewhere, but ultimately, this doesn't seem like it's impactful enough. Then we have Infectious Ghoul, a 5 mana 5/4 undead with a Death Rattle. Give a friendly minion Death Rattle, summon an Infectious Ghoul. So this dies, puts another Death Rattle onto a friendly minion that repeats the Death Rattle. Summon an Infectious Ghoul. So pretty interesting. You can kind of keep chaining these Infectious Ghouls. This might actually get some use. I feel like we've seen some kind of Death Rattle chain effects before, and especially like in Paladin, we've seen it a couple of times, in putting like a Death Rattle to buff, some of the dudes, but I don't know. They never seem like they're actually consistent enough or get enough value. The fact that this is an undead, again, might help it enough to see a little bit more play. And it is pretty aggressively statted. The 5/4 stat line, pretty decent. Otherwise, though, this just seems okay at best. We have Flesh Behemoth, a 9 mana 4/8 undead with Taunt and a Death Rattle. Draw another undead and summon a copy of it. Again, all these undeads really working with the Death Rattle aspect. I suspect if things like this get popular, there's going to be a lot of silence, and then these cards become a lot less good. Or unless there are ways to trigger these Death Rattles the same turn that you play them. There are a little bit of synergies like that, that we've already seen in the past in the game, so I definitely could see it. This one does feel a little costly, though, at 9 mana. Yeah, you're getting to draw another undead and then summon a copy of it when it dies, but for 9 mana, not the greatest body. I don't know. I think this feels like it might be a little too slow. Then we have Foul Egg, a 1 mana 0/2 undead with a Death Rattle. Summon a 3/3 undead chicken. Okay, again, more Death Rattle type stuff, summoning something else. If cards like these really do see play, I think it's going to see play in things like Death Knight that wants to take advantage of these corpses. But honestly, I don't really see a place for this here. Urbal Geist is a 2 mana 3/1 undead with a Death Rattle. Add a random shadow spell to your hand. This one, though, is pretty cool. It's an early game minion. It's aggressively statted, so normally a 2 mana thing would be like a baseline 2/2, but this is 3 attack instead. So pretty aggressive stat line there. And it does something, pretty decent when you kill it off. So I actually kind of like this one. I think that this has a place in a wide range of decks. Again, maybe something that has some sort of synergy where you don't really want to have spells that cost, a lower amount or a certain thing like that, that we've seen like Big Spell Mage. This is cheap enough. You're going to be able to kill it off pretty early, start working towards corpse counts as Death Knight, or just have shadow spell synergies in something like Warlock or maybe Priest, if that's a thing. But this one I think is pretty cool. Then we have Banshee, a 1 mana 2/1 undead with a Death Rattle. Give a random friendly undead +2/+1. Okay, again, really leaning into these undead things. We're kind of seeing all of these undead cards being revealed at once. This one seems not really all that great. Maybe you play this in some sort of aggressive undead type of deck, but honestly, outside of that, I don't know if this is really going to fit into a ton of different decks. And lastly, of course, this is the one that people are kind of losing their minds over. We got to talk about Bone Lord Frost Whisperer. It's a 6 mana 6/6 undead with a Death Rattle. For the rest of the game, your first card each turn costs 0. You die in 3 turns. Very interesting. We haven't seen something like this where it sets yourself on a timer even like this. You might hear players talk about setting players on a timer or, a 2-turn setup. But this literally creates that for you, an in-game thing that you cannot change. The fact that this has to die first for you to get the effect, it's a legendary, and it does create that 3-turn counter for you. I'm not as hyped on this one as a lot of other people are. I don't think this one is like completely game breaking, super broken. I do think it creates some really interesting things, but I also think it really will depend on how the meta is for this card. The one good thing that I think this has is it's the card at the beginning of your turn that costs 0 is just a card. It's not a spell like we have seen in the game previously. So that effect, just allowing you to play anything, it could be a large minion, it could be a large spell. Having that be 0, we know 0-cost spells oftentimes do end up being very powerful. So I can definitely see this creating some powerful, swings. But if the meta, maybe if the meta is kind of aggressive, playing this on turn 6, waiting for it to die, and then 3 turns after that still, if you're playing against aggressive decks, depending on what you're doing, you're probably dead before then. Or if you've gotten to the point where you land this, get the death rattle, you're waiting those 3 turns, and then, you know, you would die. I don't know, like you'd probably be winning against those matchups anyways. So this feels really, really weird. And I'm sure people will be playing it. I'm really kind of interested to see where people play this and like what cards they end up, you know, being able to play each turn that cost 0, like at the start of the turn. Because maybe you could also have the case where you're able to play this, kill it off, or maybe you have some sort of effect that allows you to trigger a death rattle, so you get the effect again. Your cards can cause 0 without having to kill this off. You play a huge minion onto the board at the start of your next turn, and your opponent can't really answer it. You smack them in the face for a bunch of damage. I could see that as well, but I don't know. I don't think that this card is going to create as many awesome game-winning scenarios, I think, as some people have imagined. All right, well, I don't know. These seem like some very interesting cards, these undead. It's cool to see them putting all these undead things, you know, into the game. Now we're seeing, you know, this as a new minion type. So of course there's going to be a lot of undead stuff. Again, I kind of see a lot of these just going into Death Knight. I don't really know where else they go quite yet. Maybe once we see all of the cards for this set for the other classes, then we can say, oh, okay, well, there's this this spell or this other minion that kind of works with undead for some other classes. But before seeing those at the time, these don't all seem like they're super great to me. And, you know, I think neutrals ultimately kind of end up being some of the weaker cards as well, especially the non-legendary neutrals. But what do you think? Tell me in those comments below. Are any of these something that you are just super hyped to play, or do you think are a little bit stronger than what I was saying? Let me know. I love chatting about cards and seeing how these end up actually being used once they're in the game. And if you haven't already, please check out my video here on talking about the Death Knight class, the new deck building, and how exciting that is going to be. I'm really excited for Death Knights and the new style of deck building.